In this great big world all over, everywhere you go it's just the same. It's the rich what gets it easy, it's the poor what always gets the blame. Yeah, that's how it was with poor Johnny Johnson, you know, up at Staunton Harold Hall. I went into service up there when I was, well, couldn't have been more than 40. The old Earl were alive then. He were all right. The problem was his son, Lawrence. Oh, you know, even when Lawrence was quite a young lad, he used to creep into the maids' rooms after dark and climb into bed with them. Nasty young man. After he'd done what he wanted, he'd grunt and creep back to his own room. Well, he only did it to me the once, on my first week, and it was quite painful. But I think when he saw me the next morning, he decided not to bother with me again. Must have been the birthmark on my face what put him off. All the pretty girls had it much worse. He had them time and again. And the men servants had it just as bad. They weren't molested, of course, but they were beaten, often. I can remember a time when he'd invited folk to dinner and they didn't turn up. Well, he picked up a candlestick and he beat all the men with it. It was all their fault, according to his lordship. Then there was a time when Peter Williams was looking after his favourite mare. When the Earl went to fetch it back, he said, "There's something wrong with it." He said, "Don't look right." And then he drew his sword and he ran poor Master Williams through the shoulder. When Master Williams' wife Becky came out and tried to stop him, he punched her and knocked her down. You know, even when the old Earl died and Lawrence became Earl Ferrers himself, he was just as bad. The men used to get hit and stabbed, and the girls had to put up with him poking them. You know, amongst ourselves, we used to call him Old Nick, because he was a right devil. Then after a few years, when would it be? Well, I'm no good with dates, you know, but I think I'd tell it was 1740 something. 1743? Anyway, things got better for the maidservants then, because Old Nick took himself a regular. Yeah, Margaret Clifford her name were. Her father were his lordship's land agent. I don't know what she did any different, but he were right smitten. And it were a big scandal, you know, because the following year, she had a baby daughter. Bugger me if she didn't have another one the next year, and 2 more in the years that followed. He never denied they was his, you know. And we were told we had to address Margaret as Mistress Clifford. His brother, the Reverend Walter, he didn't like the goings on. But he had to lump it, I suppose. Them poor kiddies. They were never going to inherit out. Well, apart from being born out of wedlock, they were just girls, and that were much worse. Apparently his family kept on to him about getting married and having children in wedlock. Of course, boys was what they wanted. But I ask you, who was going to marry their daughter to that wicked old devil? We heard none of the local gentry wanted aught to do with him. But eventually he did find a girl from a decent family. Oh, up north somewhere. Where was it? Cheshire? Anyway, she agreed to marry him. Mary Meredith, her name were. She were only 16, you know, half his age. Well, she were Lady Ferrers and she came to live at the Hall. But, surprise, surprise, he didn't treat her right. I know he used to hurt her. And according to her maid, he used to have a loaded pistol by the bed at night, said he might shoot her by morning. I used to like her ladyship. It turned out she were no gal to put up with that old devil. She left and went back home to her mum and dad. And then it were a whopping great scandal, because she went and asked Parliament for one of them, oh, what do you call it? Legal separation. Well, they must have known what Earl Ferrers was like, because she got it. And not only that, they said he had to start sending her money regular like. Well, he were mad then, I can tell you. But it was the law, and he had to obey. Well, of course, that's where Johnny Johnson comes in. Here's me rambling on. He's the one I'm supposed to be telling you about. Yeah, Johnny Johnson got the job of collecting all the farm rents and making sure her ladyship got her fair share. Johnny didn't want that job, you know. But when the Earl insisted on something, well, he had to do it. After a bit, the Earl started saying that Johnny was cheating him. And then he said that he was having an affair with Lady Ferrers. Well, that were a right load of cow's muck. Anyway, on this particular day, it were a Friday, all the men had been sent away from the hall for the day, and Mistress Clifford and her 4 daughters. The only people left in the hall were us 3 maids, me of course, and Elizabeth Bergeland and Elizabeth Saxon. You know, we weren't all born Elizabeth. No! That was the name the Earl said we had to answer to make it easier for him, especially when he was drunk, which was most of the time. It wasn't too bad for me, because at least I was Bessie. And it must have been right queer for Jane and Annie. Anyway, that day, Johnny came up to the hall, said he'd been told to come up and see his lordship. Well, the old devil kept him waiting quite a while, supposed to keep him in his place. Then he told me to show John into him. Well, us maids, we could hear him shouting and bellowing at poor Johnny. Told him to get down on his knees. Then we heard the gunshot. Well, the Earl came out, told me to go in and attend to Johnson because he'd been shot. We managed to get him up on a bed, but we'd no sooner laid him down when the Earl came charging back in, cursing and swearing. Oh, he grabbed Johnny by the hair and said he'd have been better off putting a bullet through his head instead of through his body. Then he went off back to his drinking. Well, a bit later he sent for Mistress Clifford and Sarah Johnson. That was Johnny's eldest daughter. You know, he told Sarah that he'd take care of her if she didn't make no trouble over her father being shot. She were a pretty girl. I reckon he had his eye on her. But she were only about 13 or so. Yeah. Anyway, after a bit, they must have got him to send to Ashby for a doctor, because eventually Dr. Kirtland showed up. But you know, Dr. Kirtland wasn't born yesterday. He had his wits about him. When he heard what had happened, he went first to Lount Colliery, and when he got to Staunton Harold, he got 6 big colliers with him. Oh, the Earl was waving his gun about, shouting about shooting anyone who tried to arrest him. Well, the doctor got him calmed down and they came inside. Doctor examined poor Johnny, said he'd probably recover in a few weeks. But he gave me a funny look when he said it. Anyway, later that night, after the Earl had fallen down dead drunk somewhere, the doctor got his colliers to carry Johnny back to his own cottage at Lount. But then, next morning, we heard he was dead. Well, when that news got to Lount Colliery, the men there marched to Staunton Harold, they got hold of the Earl, and he were arrested and taken to Ashby. Yeah, they lodged him in the White Hart, you know. Good place to leave a drunkard. I bet they didn't have much brandy left after a day or 2. Anyway, folks there said he were a murderer and he were carted off to Leicester. But turned out they couldn't do aught with him there, because the only place with enough dukes and earls to try him was the House of Lords in London. That's hundreds of miles away, you know. Thousands, probably. Anyway, they did take him down there. Yeah, and they put him in the Tower of London for 2 months. We heard he had to cut down on his drinking there. Poor soul. He could only have a pint of brandy with his breakfast and 2 pints of wine with his dinner. I bet he would curse him then, all right. But he weren't in charge down there, were he? Not like up here. Anyway, now we come to the good bit. Yeah, this'll make you gas me duck. Guess who had to go down and say their piece at the trial? Well, Dr. Kirtland, of course, and Peter Williams. And bloody me. Yeah, I had to report what I'd seen and heard on the day poor Johnny was shot. God's truth, there were a long way to go. I thought we got there when we got to Leicester, and we were only days away. I'd never been more than a mile or two away from the Hall in all my life. And there I was in that London. Well, I had to pluck up all my courage, I can tell you. Mind you, I did have a nip of gin beforehand. But to stand there in front of all them lords and say what had happened, well, I did it. Yeah, I just told them what happened and they said I'd done well and they thanked me. But I went right bloody red when I did it, I can tell you. Old Nick did his own talking. Of course, he spoke better than me. All calm and confident, cool as you like. Yeah, he tried to claim he were mad, you know. I think that was his family's idea. But them earls and whatnot, they said anyone who could talk as good as that were clearly sane. Yeah, I had to laugh at that. Mind you, only inside. Anyway, then they said he were to be hanged. Well, he were mad then, all right, because he said that were for commoners. He said as an earl, he should have his head cut off. Ha! I ask you, what difference would it make? He'd still be dead. Anyway, they did hang him. At Tyburn, 5 days later. I didn't go to the hanging. Peter Williams went. He said it were a huge affair. The Earl turned up in his own carriage with the Lord Mayor, and all the top knobs followed on in their carriages. Oh, apparently it took them 2 hours to get from the tower to the scaffold, because there were hundreds turned out, thousands. Yeah, old Nick was there in his white suit with silver embroidery. It were his wedding suit, and he even did a speech. He said it were right that he should die in his wedding suit, because it were the wedding what had led to him being hanged. Ha! He said if he hadn't been drunk at the betrothal and in the days leading up to the wedding, he would never have married. Well, I thought that was a cheek, because I never knew a day when he was sober. Oh, and there were a funny thing happened at the hanging, you know. Yeah, because he tried to give £5 to the hangman to make a quick job of it, but he gave it to the wrong man. Yeah, and the hangman and his assistant, they had a punch up over it up there on the scaffold. Well, that I wouldn't have minded watching. Peter Williams said he died quick. Only took 4 minutes. But you know, looking back, it strikes me that to hang, choke him for 4 minutes, ooh, must make it seem like 4 hours. Anyway, he was dead, and he deserved it, shooting poor Johnny like that. They buried Johnny in Breedon churchyard, you know, just up there. They buried old Nick in London. But you know, years and years later, his family had him dug up and brought back home. Oh, I can't think why. You'd think they'd be glad to see the back of him. Silly buggers. Yeah, poor Johnny in the churchyard. And that old devil in that big family vault at Staunton Old Church. Oh, I tell you, it don't make no difference whether you're wicked or innocent, murderer or murdered. If you're an earl, you go in a fine vault. If you're a servant, you go in a plain grave. Well, that's the way of the world, and there's naught you can do about it. In this great big world all over, everywhere you go it's just the same. It's the rich what gets the pleasure, it's the poor what always gets the pain. And even when you're dead, it's like I've always said, still the bloody saying.